Director of the Mitchell Center. It's a great talk today, but there's a lot of other things going on that go past you on the slides, and I would encourage you to come back and find out more. Talks here every 3 o'clock to 4 at Jim. So let me first say that two of the speakers today, Mark and Stephanie, I ordinarily, I know nothing about sports, but I know you both have roots in the Delaware Valley. And so I felt the least I could do was get those young girls dressed up in whatever you call that, and drive all the way south over the weekend after I saw how the game turned out and get some stuff just to show my respects for people from that part of the world.
Working on that hostile environment right up front for us.
So thank you for being such ardent fans and for helping me embrace my inner eagle. Okay, so today's talk, the puzzle of making the local food movement sustainable, the challenge of the supply chain. Just want to say a little bit about one of the things that goes on at the Mitchell Center is we're always looking for great people that are doing great things or want to do great things. And one way that played out I've forgotten exactly how many years ago, was when there were folks over in the Honors College who had already been thinking about this a lot, but where there was a kind of an opportunity. We like to think of the Mitchell Center as an early investor in the Sustainable Food Systems Research Collaborative. And a lot of great students and faculty got involved, and what you're seeing is year after year, project after project, student after student, that more and more capacity is built, and this work on farms to institutions is a perfect example of that. So today you're going to hear some members of that team speaking. Stephanie Welcomer, Mark Haggerty, and Michaela Murray, and if you saw the thing go by before, there aren't just Eagles fans up there, but there's a wonderful story about Michaela's work that David Sims wrote, so I encourage you to go to the website and find out more about that if you're interested. So take it away.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming, especially what had started as a pretty nasty morning and has morphed into a gorgeous day. As David said, this was really a team that got put together, focused in the Honors College. The full grant team is here, and we wrote a grant that was partially funded here, and helped us figure out how to go forward, thinking about food in the state of Maine, local food, and then specifically farm to institution. Let's see if I can make it go the way I want it to. Farm to institution work. Okay, so again, thank you for the Mitchell Center for the support of this grant, and our community partner is Maine Farm to Institution, and Riley Neubauer is a member of the team and represents them. So what we're going to do, 3 of us are going to speak this afternoon, and then Linda's going to help narrate a conversation with you. I'm going to try and do a little bit of an introduction, introduce you to food in the state of Maine if you don't know about it. I am seeing people here that probably know a lot more about food than I do, or different aspects of the food system. Michaela's going to talk about the work she did this past summer, and Stephanie's going to talk about, just going to kind of conclude our work. And so what we had initially envisioned doing was looking at the supply chain, the value supply chain, farms, the farm institution movement in the state of Maine, and the conceptualization from inputs into the farm system, herbicides, pesticides, energy, transportation, what the farmers are doing, all the way up ultimately, I would think, to the end consumer, which would conceivably in the institutions, students potentially, or the dining centers, right? So when we say farm to institution, we're thinking about institutions like University of Maine, COA, Eastern Maine Medical Center, some of the larger buyers of food. Dealing with our community partners, they really wanted us to refocus how we thought about things. And so what we ended up doing was putting part of our focus on existing data, there's a lot of studies that have occurred already in the state and the region on local food movement, farm to institution, but it's not been put together, it's not been analyzed. So that's partly what we're doing and ongoing. So I will put a huge qualifier out in front. We are still in process. We're still analyzing data. We're still also conducting interviewers. And so the last thing that's the bullet there is that we were going to interview stakeholders along the supply chain. And so in our focus of the supply chain, we've been looking or interviewing farmers, farmer aggregators, distributors, and some people in the dining sector. Okay, so that's the component that we've actually focused on in the study. And as I said, we're still conducting some interviews, and we're moving through. Okay, so farm in Maine. Why do we care about farm in Maine? Some really quick, brief ag stats, right? If you were to go on the UMaine, University of Maine right now, and if you were to go see news, that third blurb there, besides seeing Michaela and the article on her, one of the one is about the system, UMaine system, and attaining its goal of 23% of local food, and so there's references to it, right? So food, local food is in the news. The University of Maine system 2 years ago made a commitment to meet 20% local food in the UMaine system dining. The University of Maine itself was a sole operator. They run the dining facility themselves. They have had a long-term commitment here through the dining director to try and incorporate local food into the system, and they've already attained their goal of 20%, and the UMaine system announced that they had hit 23% already. So, so that's really cool. Other cool thing about agriculture in the state of Maine is we're bucking the trends. We're growing. We have younger farmers, right? Which is really not typical. We're getting more young people coming into the state to do agriculture. We are seeing the value of agricultural production's been up 24% over the last 5 years. We're seeing more land in agriculture. So it's a really vibrant thing that's really recognized for what's happening in the ag sector. Net cash farm income, $20,000 on average. We can see most farms are kind of small in the state, right? So when we talk about farms, it's really not a homogeneous entity. There's a lot of difference, and that's partially what we were trying to figure out in this study is who exactly are the farmers that are participating in farm to institution, what's going on, what are the products, right? So the main products we see are potatoes, dairy, ag. We see the main counties are producing, which are going to map right back into those. One of the obstacles that were presented in the state is none of these counties are really close to metropolitan areas, right? So transportation is a serious issue. So that's just, we have a really vibrant organic sector, right? Which is really neat, but relatively small too, and that's been a big part of the growth. Okay, so really briefly about farm to institution. Farm to institution largely grew out of the farm to school network, which was K through 12. That network really was looking at how do we educate, how do we get people to eat better food, how do we impact the environment, and how do we impact our local economies, how do we keep the vibrant food systems, okay? So that was probably, there's over, I wrote the number down. I don't have it here. Billions of dollars. I think it's 40% of K through 12 are currently involved in that system. So it's really pretty vibrant. And I think it was $15 billion worth of sales, if my memory serves me, which it doesn't do well. Okay, the local food, a lot of direct sales, smaller farms, our own farmers markets, etc. Okay, so the one thought is notions of the conventional food system and alternative food systems. And farm to institution and local foods has been envisioned as one way to help create change in the food system, right? And looking at these generally accepted descriptors, we could argue about these, but notions about large-scale monoculture, diversified, small-scale, sustainable production, energy-intensive. So they're going to have different impacts on sustainability. Right? However we define sustainability, which is an object in contention itself, right? So this has been a big push in the farm to institution and the local food system is to how do we generate an alternative food system. And what we were trying to get at was the value-based supply chain. So as I said before, briefly introduced, and the notions of it's environmentally sustainable, or is it, right? So that's one of the hopes, is it generates community relationships, it's community, right, sustainable. So this is one of the real positive impacts, and then the direct economic impact. So 3 goals of sustainability. It's really not acknowledged or well documented exactly what's going on within this supply chain though, right? So that was one of the questions. And again, just a couple numbers to toss out. So out of this 12 million, about 6.5 is actually on food products, and about 1.2 million, actually that's the latest estimates were 1.5 million. And here at UMaine itself, the statistics are about 6 million in food and 1.2 million. So both of those are over 20%. Multipliers in the literature are pretty multipliers. So for every $1 spent on local, how many extra dollars gets spent? This one would say another $1.40 would get spent. So a lot of economic stimulus in the national literature. These numbers are all over the place. A study done by Gabe McConnon and what's the guy in extension?
It's Jim McConnell.
Yeah, Jim McConnon. And another fellow here in extension at the university saw that the multiplier, the employment multiplier, about 2.2. So for every 1 job created in agriculture, there's another 1.2 created. And the multiplier on sales was about 1.8. So for every $1 spent on local food, there was about approximately another 80 cents created. So just to note the major stakeholders in this sector that are working in farm to institution, the students, right? And there's different involvement of students throughout farm to institution nationally. Major community players that are going on. Farm to Institution New England is a large one here in the region. Maine Farm to Institution we're working with. The distributors, the major distributors, the aggregators, and then the dining. So this is the groups that we were looking at in the supply chain we were trying to figure out. So some concerns at a macro level. Some concerns are, what does local mean? Okay, so the definitions of what local means range dramatically. Sometimes it's what's produced in state, sometimes it's within 150 miles of your local dining area. Sometimes the latest UMaine system is 175 miles from any of the universities, which brings us from Canada down to Hartford, Connecticut. Right? So notions of what are local really impact how we think about this. Okay, again, as I noted, there's thoughts that farm to institution really is sustainable along all 3 criteria. It's really not known. The literature is really mixed, and so we were trying to do that. One of the things that's really looked at positively is the transparency in the supply chain, the relationships that are created, and again, as farm to institution moves away from smaller direct models, we wanted to see what happens to the transparency in there. And then one of the big concerns is access for farmers. How do they get into the system if they desire to get into it? So now I'm going to sit down and let Michaela continue.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so now I'm going to talk about what I did as a student researcher last summer. So I got involved. Many of you are students in here, so I'll tell you how I got involved in case you're wondering. I just went up to one of my professors, who is also happens to be on this grant team, Julia McGuire. I told her, I'm really interested in doing research. I've never had any experience or anything like that, but if you know of anything, let me know. And literally 2 weeks later, she comes up to me. She says, I have this project and we're looking for a student. Are you interested? I had no experience, no real interest in sustainable food systems at the moment, but I took the opportunity and I went with it, and I'm happy I did. Sustainable food systems is something I care a lot about now, and I've really grown to love working on this project with Mark and Stephanie and the rest of the team. But I'll talk a little bit about what I actually did last summer. Mark mentioned that one of our goals was to kind of piece together the data that's already out there about farm to institution in the New England region. So I was given 25 sources from one of our partners, Riley, that Mark mentioned. She previously worked for Fine, and she's still a member with MEFTI. So I read through all of these sources that she gave me. They were things like reports that Fine did, or surveys, or actual independent work that cities in Maine did, like Portland had some stuff going on. So I read through them all. I took a lot of notes, and I used some qualitative coding methods to look for any patterns that were presented, especially in regards to the challenges and opportunities that were discussed. So I'll touch a little bit about what I found. And these are all presented in frequency order. So availability and scale being the concern that was brought up the most. And Mark, I think, touched on this a little bit, that, first of all, in New England, we're constrained by a relatively short growing season. So just having enough product to meet the demand of large institutional purchasers has been an issue that a lot of people are experiencing, and farmers having the willingness to sort of scale up their operations to meet that demand has definitely been an issue. Price is obviously another concern that is talked about a lot. Farmers want to charge a higher price for their products because they're premium products, and institutions are often constrained by really tight budgets, so they can't often meet what that farmer wants for their price. So there's some issues about trying to meet in the middle somewhere and find a price that works for everyone. Similarly, there's different expense costs associated with farmers needing to scale up their operations and stuff like that to meet the institutional demand, so that factors into that as well. The third most talked about one was just regulations, insurance, and contracts. So that kind of goes along with price and stuff. There's a lot of regulations and insurance that need to be met by various players in the supply chain, and that can be really costly and really time consuming. And a lot of people don't really think it's worth it to jump into that, so that's a concern too. Mark touched on infrastructure and transportation concerns. Maine doesn't have a lot of metropolitan hubs, so it's an issue to get the product from the farm to the institution, and working through transportation concerns. There's storage concerns, processing concerns. A lot of institutions will request that they have products that are either pre-cut or peeled or things like that, and farmers have to pay to have that equipment, and that can sometimes be a challenge as well. The last one was quality, and this isn't really in terms of nutrition or taste, but rather in the appearance. So institutional patrons are usually really used to a product looking a certain way, and so we find this all the time at grocery stores too. You go in there and you want to buy an apple or a tomato, and you're not going to buy one that's shaped weird or has some color variation. So this issue of consistency in the appearance of the product, and as well as having deliveries that are consistent too, and consistent volume across every delivery. So that would probably be the last challenge that was talked about quite a bit. But there were also lots of opportunities that were presented as well, so there is some hope. The utmost being relationships. This was a huge theme that I saw between various members of the supply chain from beginning to end, or people in the middle as well. Just once you are able to establish those relationships and really keep them going, you have such a sense of trust between individuals, and that amount of trust leads to better communication and better willingness to negotiate through some of those logistical concerns. So that was a huge one that we talked about. And then marketing, outreach, and education. So there was actually some literature that suggests that people really don't even know about farm to institution, that they don't really know it's a viable option for them. So an opportunity is to educate people about what it is, what it's all about, what the benefits are, and doing that through different outreach and marketing opportunities is really beneficial for making farm to institution a viable market for people. Intermediaries were also discussed. So Mark mentioned aggregators and distributors. Those, along with just coordinators, are different types of intermediaries that can help to work through some of those logistical concerns that I talked about. So aggregators will take a bunch of food from different farmers, put it all in one place, and that makes it really easy for institutions to have enough product to meet their demand. Distributors can help to work through some of those transportation concerns, and coordinators can really help to facilitate communication between both ends of the supply chain. Consumer demand is the last opportunity that was talked about. Steph will talk a little bit about champions later on, but either having champions or just a wide or consumer base that really wants farm to institution to work, that's super important. Basic economics, if you have the demand, the supply will increase. So just kind of having that demand for farm to institution is really important. And then moving forward, so my hope was that this research kind of helped to piece the puzzle together a little bit and make a more clear picture of what's going on in our region and what the challenges are right now and what opportunities we have. And so what I did really directly shaped the interviews that Mark and Steph did over the past few months. They wanted to see if what I was finding was comparable to what people in Maine are still saying now. So they interviewed farmers and distributors and asked them questions relating to this stuff to see if it held true. And then, my hope is that it also highlights the specific areas of concern for either farm to institution representatives or ultimately policymakers to help make this more of a political push for farm to institution. So, yeah, I'll let Steph wrap it up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michaela. Yep. So what we wanted to do then is tie the survey questions to particular themes, and Mark and Michaela have outlined for you what we found from the research and the macro, environmental, economic, and social context. And so we kind of parsed it out in terms of drivers of involvement, key competencies, economic attractiveness of entering the farm to institution supply chain, alignment of the entire chain along price, scale, concerns and goals, and then just straight up barriers to involvement. So let's take a look at some of these. So this would be basically a key driver along the literature and advocacy piece is why are they involved in farm to institution? We make a lot of assumptions about why people want to be part of the supply chain, but we asked all levels. So by the way, F stands for farmer, D for distributor / kind of aggregator, and P for purchaser. So that's the little shorthand. So we asked what's important to people, and we were kind of checking, do people, how do they think about most of the values associated with farm to institution for them? We heard a lot about social values and economic values, not so much about environmental values. Sustainability practices, we pretty much let it wide open as far as the definition. And again, community development, economic development, not so much environmental. So that was pretty interesting. Relationships. Michaela emphasized, one of the big opportunities in farm to institution and important factors, core competencies for players in the supply chain are the ability to build and maintain relationships. And in fact, at all levels of the supply chain, the people that we talked to, there was a lot of talk about how they build relationships, what's important, and to be a player in farm to institution involves a lot of complexity, whether you're a distributor, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a purchaser. And a lot of kind of uncertainty and ongoing flexibility needs. And so there's a kind of a dance that's done between each link in the chain. And it's a small world. I mean, Maine is one big small town, kind of, and people know each other. So there's this whole kind of ongoing evolution of the dance of the relationships. And so one of the things that was kind of interesting is this one. How do you determine if a producer is ready to sell into larger markets like institutions? And what we found is that part of the role of purchasers, distributors, and aggregators is to kind of cultivate the relationship. That some growers were kind of at a being ready to enter officially the farm to institution supply chain, and the aggregator and purchaser was kind of grooming them and helping them along, which was nice to see and nice to hear about. Economic attractiveness, one of the key things for farmers is fear of commitment. And part of the fear of commitment, and I'm kind of using a word that was said to us, is basically, am I going to be able to make a profit? Is this going to be economically attractive? And so we asked people where they stood on profit and whether or not, how much they track crop profitability. So they have the means, practically speaking, to understand what's working and what's not. Okay, purchase price. And here we're kind of starting to get into the alignment of pricing from the distributor and the purchaser's point of view. Like, what determines price? Do they see locally grown foods as possibly having a different price level, and are they willing to pay it to kind of support this values-based supply chain, right? And so we asked about that because one of the things is that sometimes local producers cannot match conventionally grown, differently subsidized national producers. Scale. Big concern with growers and farmers is how big do I have to get? And there's a lot of kind of ambient noise about scale questions. So we asked them, okay, are you where you want to be? And do you want to grow? And some farmers do not want to grow, but they want to participate in farm to institution. And so one of the interesting things that we're thinking of with preliminary results to this is the role of the aggregators and the distributors in facilitating smaller scale producers being part of the farm to institution supply chain. Okay, so scale, and then how do we think about it from the demand side? The distributors and the purchasers, do they think of changes in scale? Do they think that farms have to be big? And again, one of the things that we're finding is that the aggregators are playing a role in really supplying the volume that the purchasers need, and so they can take a bunch of smaller production levels from farmers and aggregate it and put it into a kind of a viable volume for the institutional purchaser. Okay, straight up barriers. Well, we asked everybody basically what they thought were hindrances to participating in a farm to institution. And you know, this is actually kind of an interesting question. When you think of the ideal buyer, and this is from the farmer's perspective, what attributes do they have? And for some, they had not really thought about it, which is kind of interesting. And okay, success factors. So here's just a few thoughts for success factors that we found, at least from a preliminary sense, from our pilot interviews. And this is just some kind of don't infer any kind of meaning to the shapes or the sizes of these things. Okay, I just made this diagram. Or the color or whatever. All right. So first off, I think Michaela mentioned this idea of champions. This is crucial. This is basically a kind of an alternative economic system, and so you absolutely have to have the entrepreneurial, early innovators, early adopters who are willing to jump in with both feet, usually based on some kind of subscribing values. They really want to help with community development. They believe in supporting local farmers. They do think there's a role for institutional eaters to enjoy local food. So these champions, and these are at all categories. Okay, not just one or two. Okay. The other thing that's critical, no shock here, is just relationship building skills. And this is something that we talked about with just about everybody. That what do you need to have to be able to gain and hold onto relationships? And it's kind of, some people spoke of it in terms of an evolutionary, like maturing process. And some of it is with the established players kind of, as I said, grooming new entrants and teaching them kind of how to be a successfully collaborating partner in the farm to institution supply chain. And so with this whole idea of a values-based supply chain, we have then this added dimension of grooming people to really be more flexible maybe than just a traditional supply chain and more collaborative. So that was kind of fun. Aggregators and distributors. This is very interesting, and I think that for anybody doing farm to institution work right now, basically the coalescing of a critical capacity in terms of aggregation and distributors is crucial, because as is said in that little paragraph, so farmers don't necessarily have to be more gigantic than they want to be. They do have to be GAP certified, but they don't necessarily have to have the same level of insurance that the aggregators and the distributors have to have. So their costs are some way tamped back. And from the purchaser's point of view, they get the volume. They let largely the aggregators and the distributor play a critical role in terms of determining reliability and consistency of the product. So, and the purchaser gets what I call same logistics, which means they don't have 33 pickup trucks backing up to their loading dock every Saturday morning or whatever it is. It just arrives in one big truck from the distributor or the aggregator. Okay? So, yes, I'm trying my transitions here. Just mixing it up. All right, so this was kind of interesting. So if we think about the supply chain existing in a wider macro environment, the sociocultural value for local food, who does it energize and who was kind of not so energized? It definitely is energizing the purchasers. Definitely energizing the purchasers. And to some extent, this might be a little bit more of an economic imperative that's bringing people, the aggregators and the farmers in. I'm not saying they're not energized, but this is really clear that it's energizing the purchasers. Now, this was a little provocative. Is the price really right? Is anybody getting super wealthy doing farm to institution, if that's the goal? No, is the short answer to that. But one of the things that we found is that prices are somewhat working. And one of the things is because purchasers are more flexible with buying local food. They're willing to pay a higher price. And the aggregators are working with the farmers to try and figure out what will it take the farmers to invest in the farm to institution supply chain. Okay, so what's missing? This is just a few observations. We could talk more about this, but so one thing is one of the interesting kind of commonalities is that the eaters are not necessarily demanding local food. There's a minority of eaters that are conscious of local food, but the take from the purchasers is it's a little bit more top down. It's not driven by the actual end of the fork eaters. Okay. Environmental practices. I mentioned that when we talked about sustainability, really in the environmental imperatives were not really crucial to the farm to institution, to really any of the players. And so one of the aims for the advocates is to incorporate environmental values and in terms of soil, chemicals, all sorts of things. That's not really a gate right now or a standard in terms of participating in the farm to institution. And last is, we're really not clear how much institutions are, what the scope is of institutional participation. We did talk to higher ed, and we think that there's a lot of room. So in sum, actually this is kind of just a rehash, but this is a little bit where you could go in terms of the aggregators gaining capacity, and we are starting to realize our social social values. Okay, I think that's it for me. So, boom. Where we started is where we end.
Great. First, can we give them?